Hello, welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports and another edition of what is in our stand today. Today, we are going to be working on a specialized Roubaix, and we've got a Future Shock on it, and we want to remove the fork because the customer had a crash, and as part of my crash inspection, I like to remove the fork, look at the fork steer tube, and just evaluate that. So before we go any further, if you would please, if you find this channel an informative or entertaining type of channel and you like the video content, please like, share, and subscribe. There is a notification bell there, so click on that as well. But we're trying to grow the channel, and we're about 214 subscribers April of 2021. So we'd like to grow the channel, and I'd like to be able to provide a lot more content with more time on my hands. Okay, so let's get started. And what we're going to do first is remove the top cap. And the top cap normally on a standard setup would provide a preload for your headset bearings, but in this case it's just really a cap. So we'll take that off first. Okay. Well, you don't want that to happen, but basically it's just a cap with no preload functions at all. And we're just going to set that on our workbench so that we can place everything in the order in which we removed it, so that when it's time to reinstall it, we put everything in based on the sequence that it's laying on our bench. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the stem. We're going to keep everything together because this bike, not only is it getting a crash inspection, but it's also getting an overhaul. So we do not want to remove the faceplate on the stem and remove the bars, because the customer has his position dialed in, and that's the way he wants his bars, and we don't want to remove any of that. So you'll need a 4mm for the top cap. You'll also need a 4mm for the stem bolts. So we're going to do those next. Now, generally, I prefer to use the square tip of a Allen wrench. I don't like to use the ball, especially when breaking the torque on something or applying a torque on something. But unfortunately, for this bolt here, we're going to have to use the round ball section of a Allen head. So lefty-loosey like everything else. Remove that. And the torque is printed right there. So 5 Newton meters, which is great because I use a Richie breakaway torque wrench like this, and this breaks away at 5 Newton meters, and it's idiot proof if you like that expression. So we'll use that later when it's time to reinstall everything. All right, so once that is nice and loose, then we're going to take off our bar holder here, and we'll just pull this off. And the spacer is coming with it, and that's fine because we will show that spacer as well. And so this spacer is reducing the Future Shock down to 1 1/8, so that, or I should say increasing the Future Shock so that it can be torqued with just a standard stem. All right, so that comes off. Put that in order with everything else. Then the next two items that we need to do is there's two bolts right here. And you'll need a 2.5 millimeter for that. So the 2.5 millimeter, again, being such a small bolt head, we want to make sure we're not stripping anything. So we take this guy here and we loosen. This is applying a preload onto the headset bearings, much like you would with a standard headset where the bolt comes down through here. By the way, the correct order of operations is when you're assembling this, I should say on a standard one, you tighten this bolt first, the headset cap first, then you tighten the two stem bolts. Okay, so now we loosen this up, and that now will take the preload off of the headset. Okay. Then right inside here there's another bolt, and that one is for a 4 millimeter. So we'll take that 4 millimeter wrench. Takes a little bit of an angle to find it, and once you do, let's turn this guy around to make it a little easier. There it is. And I don't like to use the round head, but unfortunately the straight does not allow me to get in there. So what we'll do now is we've loosened all of that. And there's your Future Shock. We're keeping all the spacers where they're at. We're keeping this top cap exactly where it's at. So we'll set that to the bench, again, in the order everything came out. And so you've loosened these two already. You'll try and loosen that one a little bit more if necessary. But the last thing holding everything together here is this small .2.5 millimeter bolt right here. And all this bolt is doing is providing you a nice little detent, which I'll show you here in a second, so that you always put the collar in the correct location. So we'll loosen that up, and once we get that loose enough, we should be able to remove it. And there you go. Now you can take the clamp off, and you can see that's where the 4 millimeter goes in. The 2.5 goes there, 2.5 goes there, and then on this back one, which is actually the front, there's your 2.5 millimeter there as well. And now I'm going to turn this to the side a little bit, and you should be able to see that little detent right there. And so that marks where you want to put the clamp when it's time to put it back together. Now, just like any other fork, just push that out. And you can now remove that, your bearing, your top bearing. Remember, keep everything in order. And then from underneath, you pull out the bottom bearing, okay? And that's it. That's all there is. Everything is going to go back in reverse order. And now we're going to inspect the steer tube on this customer's bike. And we want to make sure, because of carbon having, hidden cracks and things like that, if you're had a crash, you want to be able to take the fork out. You want to be able to look inside the frame as well. Make sure everything is nice and safe. The integrity of the carbon frame or the carbon fork has not been compromised. Lube everything. Use a good grease, because what you're trying to do is provide an element barrier so that any time that this rider or any rider is riding in the rain or anything like that, the water that splashes on the backside of the down tube does not get into the headset. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching the future shock of a specialized Roubaix come out of the frame. If you have any comments or anything, just leave them down below. And if you would, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and maybe made some comments on what future videos you would like to see. By the way, we are not a specialized dealer, but I get a lot of specialized and Trek bikes in my shop. Even though there is a Trek store about a mile from me, I get a lot of that Trek business, and I get a lot of specialized business coming through here. So people like to work with a small one-man shop, and we appreciate that business, and we are very, very grateful, just as much as we are grateful for anyone who has subscribed to this channel. Thank you, and we'll see you down the road.